This is episode 1 of the Justice for Nichole podcast. Please note that some names have been changed to protect their identities. The names of public officials and Nichole's family members, as well as the names of Richard Howard and Chris and Essie Breach, have not been changed. The following mentions human and animal torture and may be unsuitable for young listeners. A former city councilman, a retired county sheriff, a judge with an alcohol problem, and a drug task force agent who had a thing for the ladies. What do they all have in common? Murder. MySpace, 2008. Once a meeting place for musicians and the best platform for finding and downloading the best in new music, MySpace had been overrun with Napster wannabes and hookers. MySpace was also a great place to find love, or what she thought could turn into love. This is what Nichole Alloway hoped for when she met a guy named Dylan Merring on the site. She couldn't have known that the spark of love and promise for a new life would end in tragedy. Nichole and Dylan began chatting online. Their infatuation led to phone calls, and eventually, Dylan asked Nichole to visit him in Portsmouth, Ohio. Nichole was a young mother of 2 small children living with her grandmother, Diane Dill, in a small town in North Carolina. But Dylan and his mother made promises to Nichole that they could not possibly keep. Nichole, unfortunately, took the bait. MySpace was not a safe space.
The latest on the sentence given to former UMBC student John Gomer, the so-called MySpace murderer who killed a young woman he met online. ABC 2 News' Terry Owen says it took jurors just a matter of hours to decide. Terry?
It took 4 hours to be exact, and while the jury spared Gomer the death sentence, a judge made sure he will never walk the streets as a free man. Baltimore County prosecutors believe the rape, murder, and mutilation of Josie Brown warranted a death sentence for John Gomer, but the office refused to second-guess the jury's action.
A sentence of life without the possibility of parole, with a life sentence consecutive to that, is not in any sense a loss.
Gomer's case gained national attention because he met Brown on the internet website myspace.com. He told police when Brown refused to go home with him, he flew into a blind rage and killed her. Brown's nude body was found 40 days later, and at trial, prosecutors would seek a death sentence. But during the sentencing phase of the trial, the jury was unable to reach a unanimous consensus and returned a sentence of life without the possibility of parole.
Anytime your client faces execution and his life is spared, there's a tremendous burden off your shoulders as an attorney.
This case called for a maximum penalty, but we are not upset with the jury verdict by any stretch of the imagination.
Gomer also received a life sentence for his rape conviction. Neither family spoke with reporters after the sentence was announced, but a juror told ABC 2 News they're hoping this case will give both families some closure. Reporting live from the newsroom, Terry Owens, ABC 2 News.
In the only national coverage of her disappearance, CNN did not hesitate to blame MySpace in connection with Nichole's disappearance.
Even before Nichole Alloway got on a bus from North Carolina to Ohio, things didn't feel right.
She got on the bus to go up there. She put her first foot on that step and held onto the rail, and she turned around and looked at me. She said, "Grandma, I got a bad feeling about this." And I said, "Well, then don't go. Stay here." I said, "No, I gotta go."
Alloway's grandmother says the 20-year-old Nash County woman was going to Portsmouth to visit Dylan Merring, an 18-year-old man she'd never met in person before.
They had talked for several months prior on the phone and on the internet on MySpace.
Denise Dillon said her granddaughter wanted a relationship and was considering moving to Ohio with her own 2 children, but things didn't go as planned.
He didn't show her any apartments. Nothing added up when he got up there. He wanted to go out and hang out with his friends, and she didn't approve of a lot of his friends.
So Nichole Alloway asked her family to wire her money for a bus ticket home.
The last day I spoke to her on the phone, she told me she loved me, and I said, "I love you," and that was the last thing we said to each other.
Alloway picked up the money, but her family didn't hear from her for 2 weeks. Deputies discovered her murdered body over the weekend. No arrests have been made. Mering is considered a person of interest.
You can't trust people. You cannot just take a person off the internet and take their word for it. You have to, check these people out before you do anything.
Nichole was young, attractive, blonde-haired and blue-eyed, and most importantly, white. She had chubby cheeks that implied a childlike innocence. Nichole would have been a quote-unquote perfect victim in the eyes of the media, and yet, after her disappearance, the media seemed to completely forget about her. May 2009. Nichole climbed up the stairs of the Greyhound bus bound for Portsmouth, Ohio. She hesitated for a moment, then turned to her grandmother, Diane Dill, and told her she had a bad feeling about going. Diane urged her to stay, but Nichole got on the bus anyway. After arriving in Portsmouth, Nichole realized pretty quickly that Dylan was full of empty promises and that there was no way she could have a long-term relationship with him. He certainly wasn't ready to be a father to her 2 small children. After a couple of days, Nichole called her grandmother and told her she wanted to go home. Diane wired her money for a bus ticket, about $20. But that evening, Nichole went to the Kroger grocery store in Portsmouth and picked up her money. She is seen on store surveillance video leaving the store and getting into an unknown, dark-colored, Honda-like vehicle. Her grandmother made the following statement to the Portsmouth Daily Times, quote, "She picked the money up. They looked at surveillance cameras. They saw her leaving the desk where she picked the money up. Then the outside surveillance cameras saw her coming out on the parking lot, and when she got out of range of the cameras, she was gone." End quote. This surveillance video has never been released to the public. This is where the timeline gets a little fuzzy. Witnesses say that Dylan wanted to buy drugs. His cousin, Essie Breach, sold drugs, but she lived way out in the sticks, on a property that she and her husband were house sitting. A property, by the way, owned by my very best friend, Shannon. Not her real name. Dylan and Nichole drove out there, somehow. Maybe Dylan drove them, maybe the car seen in the Kroger surveillance video drove them out there. The point is, they somehow got out to a farm in the middle of nowhere near McDermott, Ohio. Located in Shawnee State Park, if you're driving fast enough, and the people on the back roads of Appalachia drive real fast, if you blinked, you would miss McDermott. It's not much more than a convenience store and a few houses surrounded by thick southern Ohio forest. My friend, Shannon, grew up and lives near McDermott. Somehow, Nichole got out there, got in a fight with Dylan, which made Dylan get in a fight with Chris Breach, Essie's husband, which made Dylan drive off. Dylan left Nichole at the farm. Sometime after this, and maybe even a few days later, Nichole was in a car with Jason Kraft, a known local drug dealer. Was there some kind of agreement with Jason to take Nichole to the bus station? No one really knows. A week after Nichole's disappearance, Portsmouth Police Detective Sergeant Jim Charles made the following statement to the Portsmouth Daily Times. Quote, "Nichole came to Portsmouth to meet a guy she met online. They were together for a while, a little less than 2 weeks. She ended up meeting another guy up here. He got arrested. She was in the car with this guy, and some of her property was taken during that arrest. She had nowhere to stay, so she spent the night in a shelter. The next morning, which would have been Wednesday the 10th, the property that was taken during the arrest was returned to her. We know shortly thereafter she went to the Portsmouth Kroger store and hasn't been seen since." End quote. So, Jason, who had Nichole in his car, was pulled over by Portsmouth Drug Task Force agent Stephen Timberlake on suspicion of having meth-making materials in his car. Jason indeed had those materials in his car, so he was arrested. Nichole, who was in the car, was initially detained. At this time, Agent Timberlake contacted Nichole's grandmother and asked her whether Nichole was involved with Jason Kraft and cooking meth. Diane, Nichole's grandmother, told him that Nichole wouldn't be making meth and that Nichole had only been in Portsmouth for a short time. Based on this conversation with Diane, Agent Timberlake chose not to place Nichole under arrest. After releasing Nichole from police custody, Agent Timberlake took her to the Portsmouth homeless shelter. She was supposed to spend the night in the shelter before getting on a bus back to North Carolina. However, our sources state that Timberlake immediately pulled her out of the shelter without signing her out. He didn't make sure she got on the bus, like he promised her grandmother. A couple years after this happened, Agent Timberlake's son was arrested for narcotics possession. The Scioto County Sheriff's Department conveniently, quote-unquote, lost the evidence, resulting in dismissal of all charges. Agent Timberlake is also well known around Portsmouth as being a quote-unquote ladies' man and quote-unquote helps out young women in the community. Okay, so I know this is hard to follow, but bear with me a minute. I got to tell you a story about a girl and a truck. Remember Essie Breach? Dylan's cousin, the one who sells drugs? Well, in April 2009, Essie, quote-unquote, bought a red 1982 Ford F-150 pickup truck from a man named Mike Crabtree for a whopping $50. But Essie didn't buy it in her name. Not only did she not use her own name, she used Shannon's, yes, my friend's name, and forged Shannon's signature on the title. She did this a couple weeks after Shannon gave her a similar blue Chevy pickup truck. Yes, my friend gifted Essie a blue Chevy pickup truck, and Essie still decided to fraudulently purchase the red pickup truck. Essie then, quote-unquote, traded the truck with Jason Kraft in exchange for pills. Yes, the same Jason Kraft who got arrested with Nichole in his car. All of this with the truck happened before Nichole was detained for being in the car with Jason Kraft. Jason kept this truck at his dad's house. His dad is Clarence Kraft, who we are told is prominent in the hillbilly mafia and is generally a scary guy. But I want to make this abundantly clear. This very super scary guy probably had nothing to do with Nichole's disappearance or what happened to her later. So Essie made a plan to steal the red truck back from Jason. And she took Nichole with her to the Kraft house. Someone told us that Nichole was then sexually assaulted at Clarence Kraft's house, but we are uncertain by who. Nichole called her grandmother from the Kraft house. We believe that that is the location from which she called her grandmother. Diane later sent us the following message that supports our witness's account. Back on or about June the 7th of 2009, right after Nikki left Dylan Maring's house, she went to spend the night at Shannon's house. The next day is when Jason Kraft was supposed to take her to the bus stop. Instead, he took her to his dad's house. Nikki called me from that house and said she had been raped. She said she was scared. She said she could not let them see her on the phone. I told her to try and leave, and I would call the police from here, meaning North Carolina. That's when she told me not to. She said she was all right. She would be leaving to go back to Shannon's and would be on the bus the next day. I said, Nikki, If you were raped, the police should know. She then said, well, it wasn't really rape, but I didn't want to do it. She did say it was who did it. I begged her to let me call. She said again she didn't want that. She just wanted to leave. It wasn't till the 9th that Jason left to take her to the bus stop. It was that day Jason was pulled over and he and Nikki were questioned. Late that evening is when Detective Timberlake called me and asked if I knew Nikki and why she was with Jason. Detective Timberlake apologized for making her miss the bus and said he would take her to a women's shelter that night and make sure she was on the bus the next day. That day was the 10th. She disappeared that day. It looks like Essie managed to steal the red truck back, then junked it in exchange for money to purchase more pills. In 2011, Shannon found the forged car title in her attic. Before then, she had no idea the truck even existed. We compared the handwriting in a letter that Essie wrote to Shannon, and it is identical to the writing on the back of the car title. The title was notarized by Notary Public Kimberly Keeney, who works in the Portsmouth Welfare Office. Ms. Keeney denied notarizing the title, even though it bears her stamp. She stated that her brother-in-law, Kenny Salyers, may have quote-unquote borrowed her notary stamp and seal to notarize the fake car title. We found out later that everyone knew Essie forged my friend's name, and that Essie told everyone that my friend let her do it. My friend then took the forged car title to the courthouse, and they had no idea what to say about it or how the forgery could have happened. Both Scioto County Sheriff's Department and the Ohio State Patrol said there was nothing they could do about it. They did not ask to see the forged title or the letter confirming Essie's handwriting. They asked for absolutely nothing. Remember this truck. No one has any idea where it is. If you sell a vehicle for scrap, you get something called a salvage title. There's no record of a salvage title for the red truck at the courthouse. It's like it vanished into thin air. Okay, so, Topics. Topics was like the trashy version of Reddit. Topics does not exist anymore. There were tons of anonymous posters spreading gossip and mayhem with no oversight whatsoever, but every so often a kernel of truth sprouted through the grime. It was especially popular in places where the news didn't exactly serve the community. Sometimes the information we gathered there substantiated the information we received from witnesses. On October 25th, 2009, an anonymous poster commented, "I know it's been a long time ago, but if the Portsmouth Police Department would have been at the homeless shelter that next morning to pick her up and take her to Ashland to the bus station, then she would still be alive. They told her that they would be there that next morning at 7 a.m. and they never showed up. How wrong is it that it don't bother them?" What happened between the time Agent Timberlake took Nichole out of the homeless shelter and the time she disappeared? We also have no idea how she got back to the farm, but she definitely wound up back at the farm, and that was where she would die. I'll bet you're saying to yourself, but how do you figure into this? How do you have all this information about what happened to Nichole Alloway? Well, it's because Nichole was killed on my best friend's farm. I met my best friend, Shannon, in Washington State when both our husbands were stationed on Fort Lewis. Shannon loved Washington, but she missed her real home, Scioto County, Ohio. The Army kept sending her husband to war, so she decided to move back home, and that was about 2006. Let me tell you about Shannon. She will give you the shirt off her back and not ask any questions, and she never judges you. She knew Chris and Essie Breach almost her whole life. They had a rough past and an even rougher reputation, but she wanted to trust them. Turns out that was a bad choice. When Shannon's husband got out of the military, he went to work as a contractor. His job required him to be based out of Washington State, so the family moved up there temporarily. They let Chris and Essie move onto their property because they were having money troubles. Pretty much right after Shannon left for Washington, though, Chris and Essie started inviting all their sketchy friends to the farm, and not just to visit, but to live there. Chris and Essie cooked meth in the house and sold drugs, mostly pills. They made meth when it rained because the rain covered up the smell. They dumped all the meth-making byproducts either in the pond on the hill above the house or at the end of the big field behind the house near the creek. There were numerous glass jars filled with milky white sludge in the creek bed at the end of the field. These jars were submerged during heavy rains. The creek empties into Little Brush Creek, which empties into the Scioto River. Shannon found glass jars and blue gloves near the pond. Shannon was so concerned about the sludge that she contacted the EPA. Initially, they were very interested in her story. But after Detective Matthew Spencer of the Scioto County Sheriff's Department said he would make sure someone came out to the property, Shannon received no further response from the EPA. After Nichole's disappearance, Nichole's grandma hired a private investigator named Ken Days to find her. I've called Ken and his son myself, and I have not had any luck talking to them. When their search hit a dead end, the family contacted America's Most Wanted. I will point out again that Nichole was a young, attractive blonde whose disappearance certainly would have tugged at the heartstrings of many Americans, and especially viewers of America's Most Wanted. In a move that no one understood, the Scioto County Sheriff's Department refused the help of America's Most Wanted. America's Most Wanted told Nichole's family that the Scioto County Sheriff's Department was the first police department in the history of the show that didn't want their help at all. I spoke with someone who used to work with the show, and they confirmed that information. Yes, the Scioto County Sheriff's Department turned down the help of America's Most Wanted. And then the worst news imaginable. On July 12th, 2009, Nichole's lifeless body was found in Little Brush Creek. Out in Washington State, Shannon was looking through her hometown's news. She was shocked to see her address pop up in connection with an overdose death. She called Essie immediately and demanded to know why she had to find out about the tragedy in the news. At that time, about July-August of 2009, Essie told Shannon that she had been too, quote-unquote, stressed out to call her. She then told the story about how Richie, who is Essie's brother, by the way, how Richie and Nichole were shooting meth in Richie's truck and Nichole overdosed. About how Richie, in a total panic, tried to burn Nichole's body in the fire pit at the far end of Shannon's property. So, a little aside, some of Shannon's goats had been killed by an escaped Black Panther the spring before. So in Ohio in 2009, you were allowed to own exotic pets, including Black Panthers, which are obviously not native to southern Ohio. That panther had killed several of Shannon's goats. So Shannon burned the goat carcasses in a makeshift fire pit so the panther wouldn't return. But it took a few days. Because of those fires, the fire pit was well established. But let's assume that Richie actually tried to burn up Nichole on the back end of the property. Richie knew about the goats, so to him, a hardcore delusional addict, it probably made sense to burn Nichole's body like Shannon burned up her goats. He didn't know, though, that bodies don't burn in a regular fire. Essie said that Nichole's body didn't burn, quote-unquote, like they hoped, and that's why Richie dumped her body in Little Brush Creek. Initially, the Scioto County Sheriff's Department arrested Richie in connection with Nichole's death. Richie told police that he and Nichole were doing meth in his truck at the farm and that Nichole overdosed in his car. He then attempted to get rid of the body. The police found blood in the truck. Richie said Nichole had her period. He said it was menstrual blood. He then confessed to what we are not exactly sure. They have never charged him with murder. He served a short prison sentence for abuse of Nichole's corpse, but technically, a parole violation is what put him in prison, not the abuse charge. He is the only person that has ever been charged in regard to Nichole's murder. The abuse of a corpse charge was also dropped after he served his sentence. But strangely enough, even though Richie was living at the farm when Nichole was murdered, and there was a reasonable expectation, not her real name, that Nichole was murdered at the farm, the police never came out to the house to investigate the scene, even though the family asked them to question Chris and Essie, and forwarded the following email from Bonnie, not her real name, to the county prosecutor. Quote, "Good day, Mr. Kuhn and Mrs. Ratcliffe. Mr. Kuhn, I also wanted to inform you that I did speak to Essie on January 21st or 22nd. After speaking to her at length, I just wanted to tell you a few things that were stated. Whether they mean anything, let's hope so. She stated to me that she was brought into questioning and received a lie detector, both her and Chris, and they both passed. She stated her and her husband are innocent and stated that she has been in contact with Detective Matt Spencer. She states that Richard admitted to her that a man by the name of held Richard by gunpoint and made him dispose of Nichole's body. She is stating that she thinks Nichole was killed at residence where frequents on a daily basis. She stated that her address is. Essie also said lives with a blind man in a trailer or something like that. She also stated he is wanted in West Virginia and possibly in Pennsylvania on felony warrants. I tried to check into this, but as of yet, no info. Her neighbor also stated that she has been in contact with Detective Spencer, telling him of the address and where is. She actually called me on January 21st, 2010 at 10 p.m. in a panic, saying that she called the sheriff's department because she's seen and she wants to make sure that he goes to jail for what he did to Nichole. She called me back today and stated she was unsure if the police got him or not. Essie also knew about being tased, and he had a leather jacket on, and it was not able to penetrate through his jacket. She said he was pulled over on a bike, and after he ran from the police, the bike was never impounded, nor did the police wait to see if he came back for his bike. She said she only knows this because she's seen the following day on the bike, and that is when her and got into an argument. Essie said she yelled for her husband to come out because already threatened to hurt her neighbor for snitching. The news initially reported Nichole's death as an accidental overdose. Shannon believed that for a year and a half. She had no reason to think otherwise. Scioto County Sheriff Marty Danini told the Portsmouth Daily Times that he believed that Nichole and Richie were both involved with drugs at the time of her death. Detectives believe from the investigation that Nichole and Richie were traveling on Ohio 73 while they were allegedly abusing drugs, and Nichole passed away in Richie's vehicle. After her death, Richie is suspected by authorities of disposing of her body by taking it to a rock-embedded area off of Ohio 73 in Alloway and hiding the body. The Times also reported that Denneny said that Richie only confessed to being present in the vehicle with Nichole while doing drugs when she overdosed. I want to quick interject that this was long before the current fentanyl crisis that has killed so many by accidental overdose. Denneny was quoted in the Times as saying, quote, "Traditionally, people think murder is intentionally causing the death. I don't know that that was the circumstances here. It doesn't seem to me that that would actually be murder. It may be something like involuntary manslaughter, where he contributed by being present and or providing the drugs that caused the death," end quote. Only, according to the official toxicology report seen by the family, Nichole did not have any drugs in her system at the time of her death. Her family has been successful in getting retractions from several media outlets who initially reported Nichole dying of an overdose. But let's take a second to talk about Marty Denneny. Shortly after Nichole's murder, and up until just a year and a half ago, Marty Denneny was the retired current sheriff of Scioto County. You're probably wondering what quote-unquote current retired sheriff means. Marty Denneny took office in 1999. Drug abuse and drug-related deaths skyrocketed in the county under his reign. In 2011, he retired, then ran for sheriff again in 2012. He won. So he got a paycheck and a pension at the same time. WOUB reported that Scioto County Sheriff Marty Denneny will retire November 1st, but he'll still be sheriff. Denneny says he will continue as interim sheriff and then run for sheriff again in 2012. He says this will save the county money in retirement cost. Quote, "When I come back as the acting sheriff, the county will still have to contribute to the retirement system, but they will start paying at a lesser rate. It's like 5% less than what they are paying today." End quote. When asked if he's worried about people thinking he's double dipping, Denneny says if people looked at his decision logically, they will see it makes sense. Quote, "Well, double dipping is a term people attach to it, and I agree, and I'm not denying it. And if the people of Scioto County feel like that is morally wrong and they don't want me to come back to work, then they have every right to vote against me. But I'm not going to lie down and give up. I grew up here and I want to do the best I can." End quote. Denneny is a 33-year law enforcement veteran and has been the Scioto County Sheriff for almost 15 years. Scioto County Sheriff's Department has formally detained and charged exactly one person in connection with Nichole's murder, Richard Howard. And that one and only suspect was ultimately only charged with quote-unquote abuse of a corpse, and those charges were later, inexplicably, dropped. Even though the Scioto County Sheriff's Department knew Richie lived at the farm at the time of Nichole's murder, they never searched the farm. They never questioned the 50-plus people who were known to come and go, and sometimes stay, at the farm. They never asked anyone what they thought of Richie taking a corpse to the end of the field and burning it in the fire pit, in full view of everyone. If they had questioned people at the farm, they would have discovered that Richie's girlfriend at the time drove a purple car that could, on a grainy surveillance video, be mistaken for a dark-colored Honda, like the one seen on the Kroger surveillance video. Even though the video has not been released to the public, the family has seen the video and gave us that information. Detectives never questioned the woman who drove a similar car, a woman who dated the man accused of abusing Nichole's corpse, the woman who lived on the property where Nichole was murdered. Scioto County, Ohio is what I call a news-free zone. It's a lot like living on a military base. Stuff is going on, but it never makes it to the news. That stuff especially doesn't make it to the news when that news has to do with local law enforcement. On July 29th, 2010, a woman named Joanna, not her real name, wrote the following message to Nichole's tribute page on MySpace. "Hi, I'm Joanna, and I only knew Nikki briefly, but even though it has been a year, I am still so sad. I was recently told a very detailed story of how and where she died. I honestly do not know if the person made it up or what, and I don't want to pass along hearsay. I'm not sure what to do, because it may just be made up. I am so sorry for your loss, and I hate to bother you with this. If you never want me to write again, let me know. Joanna." She then wrote a second email. "All right, I will tell you what was said, and it is graphic, and I do apologize beforehand because I know you love and miss her deeply. What I was told was that Nikki was at Essie's house, that Richie was sitting on the porch, and Essie went to the store, and Chris took Nikki into the barn and was... When Essie pulled up and saw them, but was still moving, and Chris freaked out, and so they had Richie help them put her body in the truck, and Richie drove. They put her. I was told that in the barn where she was attacked, they... Again, I am so very sorry, but I hope this helps. I really loved Nikki. She was fun and outgoing and sweet. I very much want justice for her death. Joanna." So, that red truck that I mentioned a little while ago, we think that that red truck was used to take Nichole's body to dump it. In the fall of 2010, Shannon moved back to Ohio. Again, she visited her mom the summer before that, and what she found at the farm horrified her. Chris and Essie had destroyed her house. They tore out all the electrical wiring to sell it. There were numerous syringes and needles everywhere, inside and outside. Human and animal blood and feces covered the walls and floors of the house. It was filled with the clothes of numerous unknown people. Chris and Essie had been cooking meth in the house, so the whole thing smelled like animal pee. Out in the fields, there were junked cars and car parts, tires and gas cans, glass jars filled with meth byproducts, and more trash all over the property. There were deep tire ravines in all the fields. Numerous burn piles dotted the small landscape. The creek was filled with every imaginable piece of junk. It looked like no trash had ever left the property, despite Shannon paying for trash collection the entire year she was gone. The farm looked like the city dump. Shannon and her husband quickly cleaned up their property. They had no idea Nichole had been murdered, so a ton of evidence probably wound up at the dump. Shannon said they filled an entire roll-off dumpster with trash. Shannon found some strange things all over, like most of the drywall was torn out of the second floor of the barn. With the house and property so trashed, nothing surprised her. Her biggest question was, where did it all go? Because it wasn't on the farm. And to add insult to injury, between summer and fall, when Chris and Essie vacated the farm, they stole Shannon's new refrigerator, deep freeze, washer, and dryer. Chris tried to sell the deep freeze to a friend of a friend's sister in McDermott. Shannon knew the refrigerator resided with Essie's sister, who has since died. Ironically, Shannon was going to give the washer and dryer to Chris and Essie, and they knew that. I'm going to add here that Shannon is forgiving to a fault, and their family is not hurting for money. She's the type of person to forgive and move all the way on. Our accusations don't stem from Essie and Chris destroying her house and farm. Then Chris in need of money, showed up at Shannon's property with a ring. The ring had a pink stone in it, and Chris asked if it was hers. He said he found it on her property. We found out later that Essie was pissed that Chris had asked her about the ring. Nichole's grandmother, on the other hand, told us Nichole had a ring with a pink stone in it. And again, because hindsight is 20/20, Shannon feels bad for not taking the ring. But again, Chris was known to steal, and she had no idea it could be Nichole's. Shannon's number one priority was to put this mess behind her. She didn't want to make waves. She didn't even report the stolen appliances. She just wanted to focus on the next couple of years when they could tear down the house and the barn like they always planned. And, by the way, they did finally fulfill that dream. The house and barn were demolished with the full blessing of the Scioto County Sheriff's Department in 2018. Then, on Christmas Eve, 2010, Shannon's other neighbor, Amy, not her real name, walked down to the farm with a heavy heart. Shannon was standing outside her barn. Amy told her that the barn gave her the creeps. Shannon thought she was creeped out because of the Black Panther that killed her goats. But then Amy told her how Nichole really died, and that her daughter, Carly, not her real name, was a part of it. Carly told her father about the murder and her role in it right after it happened. She didn't confess to her mother until August 2010, when she was about to go to the Ohio Reformatory for Women in Marysville, Ohio, for her part in an unrelated armed robbery. Carly told her mother that in June 2009, she walked down to the farm to buy meth. She has two slightly different versions of where Nichole's body was when she arrived. We think that Carly may have either been high when she came down to the property, so she's a little fuzzy on her recollection, but it's more likely that Nichole was still alive but unconscious, and Carly was attempting to cover up her part in Nichole's murder. Carly admitted to her mom that Nichole may have only been unconscious when she helped them mutilate her. Regardless, Chris and Essie told her that they murdered Nichole and somehow convinced Carly that she had to help them dispose of the body, probably in exchange for drugs. A short aside, Carly has a long history of torturing and killing animals. Her mother stated she knew Carly killed several cats when she was a child. Witnesses said that she tortured Shannon's cats at the farms by breaking their spines, cutting out their tongues, or gutting them when they were still alive. She shot Shannon's dog in the head and bashed in the head of Shannon's goat. Shannon found the skulls of the goat and dog, and her vet confirmed they died traumatically. So it would be entirely within the realm of possibility for Carly to torture, murder, and mutilate a human being. In another version, the less likely version, she said that Chris and Essie murdered Nichole on the second floor of the barn, then threw her out the window. Carly told her mother that the reason she didn't go to police sooner was that Chris and Essie threatened to kill her children if she said anything to anyone about the murder. They also threatened to kill Richie's child if he said anything about the murder. Essie was Richie's daughter's guardian, and Richie was in prison, so this was a viable threat. Carly told her mother exactly what they did to Nichole. It was inhuman. Shannon asked Amy about all the drywall and cement missing from the barn. Amy said there was so much blood on the walls in that room, Chris and Essie knocked out the drywall in that room and dumped it in the pond. Then Amy said that when Chris murdered Nichole, it left some blood on the cement downstairs that wouldn't wash out, so Chris had to cut out that cement and dump it into the pond. Chris told Shannon he had to cut out that cement because the creek flooded and filled up the barn, and that was the only way to drain the barn. We told the Scioto County Sheriff's Department about what Amy and Carly said. The Sheriff's Department didn't want to question Carly, even while she was imprisoned at the Ohio Reformatory for Women. It was only after I sent numerous email tips to the prison administration that Detective Matthew Spencer of the Scioto County Sheriff's Department followed up with her. We found out later that he told her that her information was not of any use to the investigation. Shannon and I went online and found several topics discussion boards regarding Nichole and her murder. The community discussed it freely, uncensored, and at length. A common theme was that the police weren't going to do anything about her murder. Shannon told me that Essie collected news clippings about Nichole's murder and plastered them all over the walls of Shannon's bedroom closet. All that was torn down when Shannon cleaned up her property. Almost immediately after the murder, Essie was even brazen enough to contact Denise Dubois, Nichole's cousin, and Diane Dill. Both Denise and Diane spoke by phone and online with Essie for many, many hours regarding Nichole. Denise told me that she always suspected Essie, but wanted to get information from her. Essie even sent a bag of quote-unquote Nichole's clothes to Diane. Diane said she didn't recognize anything. One of our witnesses told Shannon that these were her clothes because she and Nichole were about the same size. You know, the more we investigated Nichole's murder, the stranger it got. It was odd that the Scioto County Sheriff's Department never went out to the farm until August of 2010, and that was to recover a stolen ATV. They did not return to the farm until spring 2011, and that was after a lot of hounding from Shannon. Detective Matthew Spencer very reluctantly came to the farm. He did not question Shannon regarding Nichole's murder, and he didn't collect any evidence. He seemed much more concerned about the negative things being posted about him online, mostly by Nichole's family. Detective Spencer has never restricted access to the barn or house. Eventually, Detective Spencer came out to the farm a second time, but again, he did not collect any evidence. Amy and her husband, Ralph, not his real name, had, at this time, told Detective Spencer everything they knew about Nichole's murder. Detective Spencer only reluctantly took their statement. After Detective Spencer left that day, Shannon went to pick up her kids from school. When she returned, she found Chris's SSI benefits card shoved in the latch of her sliding glass door like someone had used it to try to pry open her door. A few weeks later, Detective Spencer called and told Shannon that he could not collect evidence until the local evidence collection unit, which serves several small counties, was available. When the evidence unit became available, nearly a month later, they came to the barn and, quote-unquote, collected evidence for nearly 4 hours. Shannon is uncertain of the exact date they came to the house, but it was certainly before April. It was still very cold and her pond was frozen. She said that she did not see them take anything from the barn. They did not ask to search the house, even though Shannon gave them, quote-unquote, free rein to search the property, so they didn't need a warrant. While Detective Spencer was on the property, Shannon told him that there was a layer of topsoil in the stalls in the barn that she didn't put there. She discovered it after receiving the email from Diane detailing the murder. The soil was visibly distinct from the original hard dirt floor. Although Shannon told Detective Spencer about the topsoil, neither he nor the crime scene investigator removed the soil from the stalls. When Detective Spencer was out at the farm, Shannon pointed out several marks that looked a lot like blood. And yes, they did look a lot like blood. Detective Spencer told her that the spatter marks were not blood. He wouldn't even consider it as evidence. So we cut out that section of wall before the barn was demolished. In July 2011, the Scioto County Sheriff's Department told Shannon she could tear down her barn because, quote-unquote, there was no evidence in it. So in 2011, I went out to visit my friend, and we decided to collect evidence ourselves because eventually I knew, Shannon knew, that she would eventually tear down that barn regardless. She didn't want the barn. She wanted to build a new barn. So I went out to the barn and I swept out the stall where Carly said Nichole had died. It took me about a half hour to photograph and sweep away the topsoil in the first stall. Before Shannon knew about the murder, she had been keeping rabbits in that stall, so there were rabbit droppings. There was a hutch and a large table in the stall. Nothing was moved by Detective Spencer or the crime scene guy. Nothing was moved out of the way to look for anything. I discovered several torn pieces of the same sheet with strange stains on them. When we tested one of the strips with luminol, it tested positive for blood. Yes, I know that I am not an expert, and yes, I know that there are other things that will make luminol test positive, but basically we just wanted the police to take them and test them, which they have never done. I found a similar sheet upstairs with a large square cut out of it. It smelled like an unknown strong chemical, and it's possible that that was used to clean up meth-making materials. I am no expert, but again, all of the stains did look like blood spatter. When we bought the luminol online, we conducted several experiments in the barn. We removed several areas of drywall and carpet before we did the experiment because we were using the quote-unquote student luminol, which the package stated can destroy DNA. Our experiments showed blood where the spots were, but unfortunately we couldn't get photos of the luminol when it was glowing. The spatter marks on the wall were indeed blood. We also found blood spatter in numerous other places in the barn. Most notably, we found what appeared to be bloody footprints on the stairs, a stain near the top of the staircase that looked as though something bloody had been wrapped up and placed there, and a spot on the carpet where there appeared to be quite a bit of blood staining, although our subsequent tests proved inconclusive on that area of the carpet. Shannon also found several small bones outside the barn that, to our untrained eyes, resemble human finger bones. She took a couple of these bones to several Portsmouth veterinarians who told her they were most definitely not animal bones. Shannon attempted on several occasions to give those bones to Detective Spencer, but he refused to take them. I even took them to my local crime lab, but they wouldn't even look at them. They would not even talk to me about them. We also found a glass tube with what seems like blood in it, a condom wrapper. These items support witness accounts of what may have occurred in the barn prior to Nichole's murder. Shannon also told Detective Spencer about the large amount of drywall and cement that had been cut out of the barn by Chris and Essie and were nowhere to be found on the property. Considering the mountains of other trash found on the farm, the drywall and cement were strangely absent. Shannon told Detective Spencer that it might be in the pond, but detectives never searched the pond. Shannon and I found a section of the floor downstairs in the barn that was dug out, and some drywall and cement were buried there. There has never been drywall on the walls of the first floor of the barn. We considered draining the pond ourselves, but Shannon was justifiably concerned that the pond may be so toxic that it would be unwise to drain it into the creek. Again, she had attempted to address this matter with the EPA, but as soon as Detective Spencer got involved, there was no further communication with them. Shannon spoke with an individual who claimed to have personally witnessed Nichole's murder, but including that information here would likely put that person in danger. So I am choosing to exclude it. We also received a video of someone in police custody stating that they had talked to a quote-unquote blonde man, and that someone had said that blonde man had killed Nichole. Chris Breach is blonde. Shannon started talking to people in her community to gather more information. In addition to Amy and Ralph, a man named Skeet told her that Chris admitted to him that he killed Nichole. Apparently, when Chris is high, Chris spills all his secrets. Skeet said Chris told him how he killed Nichole. Soon after, when Skeet was at Chris and Essie's house, either Chris or Essie maced Skeet, then beat him. Chris threatened to harm another witness, quote-unquote, in the same way he killed that girl. Right about now, you might be wondering, okay, why haven't you taken all this to the police? Well, we have. Nichole's family, Shannon, me, we have all contacted the FBI, Ohio SBI, Ohio Internal Affairs, Ohio Attorney General's Office, and U.S. Marshal about this matter. We have contacted numerous media outlets, including Dr. Phil, Nightline, and Nancy Grace. A local media outlet told us they couldn't investigate Nichole's death unless they worked with the Scioto County Sheriff's Department. Despite the information on her death certificates to the contrary, Scioto County Sheriff's Department tells anyone who calls them that Nichole overdosed. The Scioto County Sheriff's Department even threatened Nichole's family with a lawsuit if they didn't stop posting online. I have personally been threatened with lawsuits for talking about it. About 7 years ago, I sent a FOIA request to all relevant agencies in Scioto County. I received letters back from all of them stating that it was still an open case and they couldn't release any information. Recently, I submitted another FOIA request for Richie's case, which has long since been closed. I did receive paperwork back from one agency, but no other. All of this might seem like it's just gross incompetence on the part of a small-town police department, but that's because you didn't know that the man that used to pimp out Essie Breach was indicted on federal human trafficking charges, and they nearly indicted a Portsmouth judge along with him.
I've heard of mothers and daughters being basically pimped out by Mike Moran. These guys are coming in from Philadelphia, New York, Columbus. This is well known, these Portsmouth girls. This has been going on too long. The whole community knows it. I don't want my daughters to be the next Moran girls. So this has to end.
For decades, women in Portsmouth, Ohio have told stories that describe a sex trafficking ring run by Michael Moran, a local attorney and former city councilman. It's a dark secret that people in this small town openly talk about. Now, several women tell the Inquirer they were lured into a life as sex workers with the promise of making hundreds to thousands of dollars nightly. But eventually, they felt trapped by fear and their drug addiction.
Totally false. Totally false. Now, I will say this. I make my living as a lawyer, and I think I'm a pretty decent lawyer.
I was Mike Moran's #1 girl. Mike introduced me to some friends, and I was paid extra for having sex, doing little dances, naked hot tub.
I have never had a prostitution relationship with any of these girls.
Mike Moran not only paid my bills and made sure that I was taken care of, he also made sure that my drug habit was taken care of. You know, I don't think he cared if I was using the drugs. He just didn't want, like I said, he just didn't want me to be, you know, too bad off, too far gone.
The drug issue that we have here, it seems like a lot of women are being exploited by male drug dealers who either have the women transport the narcotics or the opioids back, and or they take advantage of them because they're addicted to it and provide them with the drug in exchange for sex.
This southern Ohio town, along the banks of the Ohio River, is home to 20,000 people and sits in one of the poorest and least employed regions in the state. Portsmouth was once an economic rival to Cincinnati, but was hit hard when its manufacturing base collapsed in the 1970s. Then, pill mills dispensing OxyContin took over the area in the 1990s and early 2000s, starting a wave of drug abuse that still lingers. In some ways, the environment of Portsmouth helps keep the sex trafficking operation running. The men allegedly connected to it work in several branches of local government. These include some whose job it is to protect exploited women: police, a judge, and other elected officials. The women all tell the same story of powerful, connected men taking advantage of them. Many are too afraid to go on camera.
Mike would set me up with someone. The way they would word things is, such and such's house needs cleaned. Why don't you go be a cleaner for this gentleman?
I've gone to some trips and stuff. I would meet the friends at hotel rooms, and I would go up to their room and have sex with them for money. Sometimes they would pay me themselves or at least tip me, $100 or something, and Mike would pay me the rest.
I've been to his office many times, and many times he'd have different girls working, filing paperwork. And at the same time that they were filing paperwork, a gentleman might stop by and she might take him to the basement.
I feel like Mike trafficked me to his friends or pimped me out even.
I'm not going to stoop to defending myself against these people.
Mike reminded me often that, I wouldn't have anything without him.
If I were doing drugs or selling drugs or prostitutes in 40 years, do you think there'd be one person that would, nothing. I don't even know what give me the definition of a sex trafficker.
Sex trafficking is when someone is coerced into sexual activity for money against their will. That coercion can be the threat of physical abuse, the threat of legal action, or threatening to or withholding drugs from someone who is addicted.
Human trafficking could happen here. The conditions are ripe. You have drug addiction rampant. You have unemployment. You have poverty, which all the three of those go hand in hand, it seems like. So you have a built-in group of folks who are desperate, maybe hopeless, that could be preyed upon by those that would seek to use them for material gain.
I was made to feel like I had to do those things and that there wasn't really any getting out.
You can walk into a restaurant and see Moran in the corner, have two girls sitting with him at a restaurant, and you'll hear somebody else say, "There's Mike and his girls."
Mike's had so many rumors about him for so long, I'm not sure he really cares. If there was something there, I'm surprised that nothing's happened.
First of all, I think to investigate Mike Moran or any of the other attorneys, I don't care who it is. I mean, if it's that big a deal and it's that far reaching out of state, out of country or whatever, I just don't think we have the ability, the manpower, resources to do it.
The experiences these women shared are backed up by a federal affidavit that describes the decades-long sex trafficking ring headed by Moran. Federal agents submitted the affidavit as part of a wiretap request for a drug investigation that included Moran. They said that Moran recruited and employed women to travel as prostitutes and distribute drugs in other states, including Florida, New York, and Nevada. The documents say Moran promised lenient sentences to his female clients in exchange for working for him, an offer he could make because of possible help inside the police department and court system. The DEA delivered the results of the investigation to the FBI, but Moran has not been charged with a crime.
If you look at the affidavit, those are confidential informants under indictment by the FBI, and they say, "Do you know anything about anyone?" And it could go easier for you if you can tell us something.
I think sometimes Mike thinks he's doing girls a favor or he's doing a good job, and it's kind of like he's leashing a dog so it stays out of trouble, but at the same time he has control of that dog or that girl.
These girls They may have voluntarily went there, but it's like walking into your own death or into your own prison, because now you're stuck. It wasn't like I could just go to the police department. There's no one to tell. Everybody's in each other's pockets. You can't.
In addition to not trusting the police, many women say they are scared of becoming one of the dozen or more women linked to drugs or prostitution who have disappeared or been killed in southern Ohio this decade. One of those missing women is Megan Lancaster, who disappeared from Portsmouth in 2013 and has never been found. The case remains open, and her family continues to search for answers while making sure she isn't forgotten. Megan's story casts a shadow of fear over this town, especially for these women who are afraid they will end up like her if they speak out.
I was scared that I would disappear, that they would kill me and get rid of me, and that would be the end of it. Or I would be, framed for something. I mean, nothing has changed. Just a new set of girls. Because after you're a certain age, he doesn't want to have anything to do with you, Mike, or the friends. They all want a young girl.
I feel like a number of these individuals, they're used up, thrown away, and discarded like they're trash. And they're not trash. They're an emotional wreck. They are chaos. They need help.
Stay tuned to episode 2 of the Justice for Nichole podcast. I'm Starling Snow. Want a deeper dive? Then stay tuned for more episodes of the Justice for Nichole podcast.